It would really be stretching the definition of the genre to call the indie RPG off a sports game. But I'm not going to let that stop me. This is the Batter. He's the main character of Off, and he's the reason why I felt compelled to play this game. He's also the reason why I can justify talking about this fascinating game on my YouTube channel about sports games. Welcome to another episode of the Jackie Peanut Sports Machine. There isn't much else about baseball to be found in Off, which I guess shouldn't surprise me. The game was created in 2008 by Belgian collective Unproductive Funtime, led by the game's creator Mortis Ghost and the musician behind the soundtrack, alias Conrad Coldwood, and was just recently re-released on Steam. You may have also been surprised to hear about Belgians making a game about a baseball player. But hey, according to Wikipedia, they won the European Baseball Championship in 1967. Yeah, I don't get the impression that's what inspired Mortis Ghost to make Off. Released in 2008 in French and translated to English in 2011, Off is one of the most influential RPGs to come from the software RPG Maker, a free and simple software that made it possible to create a game as a solo dev or a small team, even if you didn't have a ton of technical know-how. It could even allow a random pair of Belgians to make a cult classic video game starring a nameless baseball player as its protagonist. The game has been credited as influencing a whole host of indie RPGs that have come out over the past 15 years, most notably Toby Fox's 2015 classic Undertale and its sequel Deltarune, which started in 2018 and just released its third and fourth chapters earlier in 2025. That's how I got here. Deltarune brain rot plus baseball brain rot meant I absolutely had to play this game. A huge part of Off's appeal comes from unraveling the mystery of what exactly is going on in this world that you go through as the Batter. The Batter himself is a significant part of that mystery. All you really know about him as the game starts is that he is on what he considers to be a sacred mission.
We're on a mission from God.
That mission? He must purify the world. The process of purifying looks something like this. Those of you who played the Super Nintendo Final Fantasy games, not to mention quite a few other games throughout history, will recognize this kind of battle. Off's combat is pretty standard active time battle RPG fare. When the bars on the bottom right of the screen fill up, that character can select an action. Attacks, competences, reminiscent of spells or magic in most RPGs, objects, usually referred to as items, and a couple others that rarely matter. Then the bar empties, and once it's full, they can act again. The Batter's competences are where we get a vast majority of the actual baseball references in this game. He has a set of healing competences: save first base, save second base, save third base, save fourth base, and one that you unlock if you grind more than I did when I played the game, save secret base. I think this is actually a pretty strong sign that baseball was not on the front of Mortis Ghost's mind when making the game. Why wouldn't he just call it Save Home? But maybe that wouldn't have made sense to the French language audience for whom the game was originally made. He also has attacking competences: Furious Home Run, Special Home Run, Magic Home Run, and Ultimate Home Run. These aren't animated though, as the combat is pretty bare bones, and that's pretty much it for the baseball references. Despite that, Off's combat is very satisfyingly quick, and thankfully not terribly difficult, because I really don't think the combat is the point of this game. It gets the job done, but it's certainly not the reason this game was so fondly remembered by the cult following that picked it up in the early 2010s. So let's talk about the story, which, just to warn you, doesn't involve nearly as much baseball as I had assumed I would get from a game starring the Batter. Here's where I drop the requisite spoiler warning for Off. I'm not going to go into a full plot reenactment or anything, but I will reveal some pretty major plot points of the game. It's short, I got through it over Labor Day weekend, and well worth the time if this is your kind of thing, so go play it. The story starts by dropping the Batter into an area called Zone Zero, where a cat calling itself the Judge greets you both and is quite suspicious of your presence. Yes, both of you. The Judge recognizes that you, the player or the puppeteer, however you want to call it, are a separate entity from the Batter, and that you are the one guiding the Batter through this world. You then go through a tutorial from the Judge that teaches you all about the battles and the puzzles the game will throw at you. The game's map only has 3 other zones you can enter, as well as a place called simply The Room. You must first go through the 3 zones and purify them of the specters that have taken root there. At first, it felt like the Batter was your typical RPG protagonist, a chosen hero that was the only one who could save the helpless NPCs from their plight. But as you go deeper into the game, it becomes less and less clear that the purification you're assisting the Batter in completing is actually a good thing. If you go through any of these zones after the first time you've completed them, they will be almost completely lifeless, with not only the people and creatures but even the color that was previously there now missing. Finally, you enter the room, an area that seems to only hold a child's bedroom and a few connected rooms. It heavily gives off the vibe of a bunker or some sort of underground fortress. After solving some truly creative puzzles that even take advantage of the mechanic of save slots, you'll reach who appears to be the final boss, the Queen, the one in charge of the zone guardians you've been dispatching. The Queen turns out not to be the game's final fight. Continuing past the Queen leads to another fight against Hugo, a sickly child who first appeared in short cutscenes after you kill each of the first two zone guardians. This fight is really a glorified cutscene in itself. Hugo doesn't fight back, and the batter just attacks until the child is, well, purified. It's heavily implied throughout the final section of the game that the world of Off was a creation of this child's imagination. The scenes and dialogue featuring the batter and the Queen initially suggest the two are the child's parents, but one line, that was mistranslated in the version I played, actually reveals that Hugo is the son who created the batter and the Queen, who appear to merely be playing roles as the boy's parents. It's never laid out explicitly, but I think it's fair to assume that the rest of the world is a creation of Hugo's too, perhaps rebuilt with help from the Queen. After purifying Hugo, the batter reassures him that there will be no more darkness. The room then turns monochrome, just like the purified zones after you've defeated the Guardians. All you can do is progress to a room with a switch. This is where the game's biggest twist is revealed. The judge follows you into the room. The judge confronts not only the batter, but you, the player, specifically calling out your willingness to keep killing just because you thought the scene called for it, because that's how these games are supposed to be played. For the first time, the player can do something other than control the batter. You can choose the ending. The official ending keeps your control with the batter, and you purify one final enemy, the judge. You then flip the switch to off, the screen goes black, and the credits roll. If you opt to go with the judge and see the special ending, the same fight occurs, but with the player controlling the judge, and the batter is the new final boss, rocking a truly monstrous enemy portrait. Mortis Ghost has confirmed that the batter doesn't shapeshift or something as a result of the player's control moving to the judge. It rather represents how the batter would appear to the player and the judge, now that his murderous intent has been fully revealed. Which really makes you think about some of the enemies that you encounter throughout the game. The batter informs you that this decision is mostly meaningless. There's nothing the judge can do to restore life to the already purified zones. Everything we've purified will remain purified. But for the judge, preventing the batter's total victory is enough. Instead of the world simply going to black as the credits roll, we can see the judge triumphantly roaming throughout the otherwise empty purified world. None of that has anything to do with baseball, you might be saying. Incredulous, given that you are watching this on a channel called the Jackie Peanuts Sports Machine. Fair enough, I say. But I think you might be interested in the same question I had when I first started off, and am still asking after playing the game. Why baseball? What part of telling the story required him to be the batter, and not the quarterback, the striker, the point guard? Hell, why couldn't he just be the guy? I actually think the fact that this game was made by somebody who presumably has very little cultural connection to baseball just makes this question more interesting. What was so captivating about the image of a baseball player? What did Mortis Ghost think that a baseball player could uniquely communicate? On his Tumblr, Mortis Ghost simply refers to his inspiration for the batter as a sports photo. But I still think the question is worth diving into. The batter's design is extremely sparse. The only thing that's consistent about him across all his in-game assets, as well as the official art, is the presence of his blank black hat and a similarly blank expression, sometimes so blank as to even be rendered as faceless. The visuals of baseball work well here. Baseball players' faces aren't totally obscured like players in helmeted sports like American football or fencing. But unlike basketball or soccer players, a baseball player's hat allows the artist to obscure the batter's face by picking specific angles or lighting. This is a really common theme in art of the batter. Even though the batter definitely has eyes, there they are, right in the talk sprite, and on his walking sprite. A lot of art, both official art and fan art, represents him either with his eyes obscured by the shade of his hat, or just without eyes period. If he has any facial features at all, it's usually just a simple line to represent a mouth, showing little or no emotion. And that means that other than being a dude who hits things with his baseball bat, the batter can pretty much be whatever you want him to be. There's so little to go off of here that in order to turn the batter into a character with a personality, we as the players have little choice but to project onto him. I assume that this is all a play on the blank slate style of protagonist that is so popular in role-playing games, a natural result of the selling point of a role-playing game being that you play the role. You don't want your main character doing something that would ruin your immersion, after all. Thus you get characters like the main characters from the early Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest games, the Pokemon protagonists, Ness from Earthbound, Gordon Freeman from Half-Life. We could go on like this forever. Designing somebody like the batter, whose entire deal is looking like a blank slate like this, is essentially an invitation to treat him like just another good guy to project ourselves onto, even though the game explicitly tells us that's not how the relationship between player and character works in this game. This is where it started to click for me. If you want to create a blank slate character, there is no better sport to choose than baseball. I don't actually think baseball is a boring game. I played it my whole life growing up, and there are times where I miss it dearly. I love the mind games between pitchers and hitters, and the insane stress of high leverage at-bats in big games. More specifically, I don't think it's the game itself that makes baseball boring. Baseball is notorious for having a culture that squelches personality. It's a sport where somebody celebrating often turns into controversy, and sometimes results in projectiles getting launched at their heads at speeds approaching 100 miles per hour. It's not accurate to say that baseball players don't have personality, but the range of acceptable expression is small, and even for great players, there's constant social pressure to stay within that accepted range. Baseball is still a popular sport, with tons of people who watch, but it has all but totally lost its ability to create stars, household names even for people who don't otherwise engage with baseball. A lot of that is the fault of the league and its executives, as they've shown no interest in promoting the personalities of their star players. But in a lot of these cases, there's not much to sell in the first place. It's not that baseball players inherently lack personality. Rather, the systems of discipline put in place from the lowest levels of baseball all the way up through the minor leagues do a tremendous job of eradicating it. If you're curious about more on how this happens, I highly recommend Jim Bouton's book Ball 4, a book about his experiences as a member of the dreadful 1969 Seattle Pilots. Bouton was a pitcher who reached the All-Star game in 1963 as a member of the New York Yankees, and stayed in the league until 1970. He was also one of the most unique baseball players of all time, one of the most outspoken personalities the game would ever see. And a lot of people in baseball hated him for it. More specifically, they hated that he revealed secrets of baseball's locker rooms with Ball 4, which was at that point by far the most candid depiction of what actually happened behind the scenes in professional sports. But there was also some friction caused by the fact that he was somebody who devoted great thought to and was willing to speak up about his values. As Robert Elias and Peter Dreyer put it in the Fall 2021 Baseball Research Journal, produced by the Society of American Baseball Research, Bouton began speaking out on social issues, and his teammates and Yankees management began regarding him as a flake. They found him too intelligent and outspoken for his own good, an outside agitator disturbing the status quo. He typically sat at the back of the team bus, reading. He was considered a free thinker, which in those days was one step away from being a communist to conservative sports minds, observed sports writer Ron Kaplan. Bouton was basically run out of the league for writing Ball 4.
Are you in any danger of when you walk out in the field these days and play from your fellow teammates?
Not from my fellow teammates, but I think some guys on the other teams would like to kill me, and it wouldn't surprise me if I got punched in a hotel lobby somewhere.
Well, that can hurt.
Yeah. You know, you left out two adjectives. You called me Judas and Benedict Arnold. It's also backstabber and social leper, too.
Oh, yeah.
Bouton wouldn't appear in the majors again until 8 years later as a 39-year-old with Atlanta. He certainly wasn't at his best, but he had proven to himself and the world that he hadn't been out of the league for nearly the past decade because of his talent, but because his personality was considered too unpalatable for the powers that be. Bouton's team for much of the 1960s, the New York Yankees, would later literally enforce an anti-personality rule, a ban against facial hair. This was started by owner George Steinbrenner in the 1970s as a way of enforcing discipline and power over the players, most likely as backlash to the massive salaries some players like Yankees great Reggie Jackson, also one of baseball's biggest personalities, were commanding. These were the early days of free agency, and thanks to freely negotiated contracts for star baseball players, salaries were starting to skyrocket. Steinbrenner's policy was a way to remind baseball's early millionaires like Jackson that there was still somebody else above them on the ladder. It should also be noted that it's definitely not a coincidence that Jackson was a black man, and that many of the players impacted by this policy were minorities. This directive was only amended for the 2025 season to allow well-groomed beards, ending 5 decades of the policy. Even though this wasn't an official policy until the 1970s, it was very rare to see anything other than clean-shaven Yankees throughout their history to that point. The Yankees are meant to be immediately recognizable by their uniforms, clean monochrome with the pinstripes, and who are you to think you deserve to draw attention away with your facial hair? The result of this policy is you get a lot of guys who look like this. Oh. I have no idea if Mortis Ghost has any clue about how well these aspects of baseball culture seem to line up with what he was trying to do narratively with the batter. But at the very least, I've talked myself into the vision of a baseball player specifically as a blank slate. I think it works very well, and in a way that would be harder to sell with an athlete from an individual sport, or from a team sport that fostered more personality and individuality. This wasn't the first thing I thought of when I saw the batter. No. The first thing I will always think of when I see this character is the baseball Furies from the classic 1979 movie The Warriors. With nothing more than some monochromatic baseball uniforms and face paint, costume designer Bobby Mannix created one of the most memorable movie gangs of all time, especially given that they don't have a single actual line in the movie. As she told Dazed, despite that, the baseball Furies are the second most popular gang in the movie after the titular Warriors themselves. Mannix had a lot of gangs to put into costumes and a tiny budget, so she had to find a way to get creative with cheap outfits. The Furies are literally just wearing blank baseball uniforms and face paint, but it works. There's just something incredibly creepy about somebody wearing a full baseball uniform anywhere other than a baseball field. This shot, where the lead baseball Fury crests the hill, and all you can see is that silhouette and his blank face with that crazy makeup, and the rest of the gang follows, it really sells that these are not dudes that you want to mess with, unless you're a pretty bad dude yourself. Could they have pulled something off like this with some other sport? The Warriors arguably came out at the height of baseball's popularity, so that might just be why it was on Mannix's mind. A 2020's remake of The Warriors might have the football Furies instead, and I feel terrible for speaking something like that into existence. But I don't think you get the same effect with helmets and pads, and I also think basketball uniforms are too exposed to have this sort of effect. Given that Mortis Ghost is both not from America and was still 8 years away from being born when the Warriors came out in 1979, I would actually be pretty surprised if the baseball Furies were an influence on the batter in any way. He also didn't mention the Warriors in an FAQ on his Tumblr where he talks about influences, which included games like Final Fantasy VI and movies like Brazil. But I can't help but find deep similarities between the batter and the Furies, especially with the leader, this dude with the green face paint and the black lipstick. I think it's the lipstick that really does it, because of all the artwork where the batter's only facial feature is a single line to show his mouth. It's the same effect. I find it remarkable that these character designs, coming from very different places, both accomplish the same thing. They produce characters who are creepy and compelling in part because of how little outward personality they have. Both the baseball Furies and the batter are empty shells, and if you happen to see them in the wrong light, they can both look very, very scary. If you choose the judge's ending, you fight the batter and see him in an entirely new light. Mortis Ghost has said that this is not the batter transforming as a result of your control shifting to the judge or anything of that nature. Rather, this is how the judge now sees the batter after all the destruction he's carried out throughout the game. Everything in Off is trying to get you to think about why you see these beings you're purifying as your enemies. This battle and this fresh perspective on the batter really drive that point home. If this is how he looks to the judge, understandably so, as you actually kill the judge's poor brother Valerie as part of the second boss fight, how can we trust that the terrifying visions of characters like this, or like this, were genuine? What if that was just all we could see through the batter's depraved eyes? And why didn't we ask this question earlier? I fell for it. I've been conditioned by playing games like this my whole life, would you just take for granted that you're playing as the good guy? How could this cool, calm, and collected baseball man be a bad guy? That's me, after all. And I'm good. There isn't much to do in the world of Off once you have this realization. That's not a criticism, it's just the reality of the game. Choose not to purify Zone 1, and you'll be stuck there forever, and it's a pretty grim place. There isn't much you can do for the people who are obviously suffering, given that all the batter is capable of doing is purifying things, and we know how that goes. But once you've had that eureka moment, I think the game's story has done what it's set out to do. There's only one place in the story where baseball actually comes up in any real way, other than the names of the batter's competences and his weapons being baseball bats. It's a bit in the room, the final sequence leading up to the fight against the Queen. Clues around the room suggest that Hugo has been forced to stay inside, most likely because he's sick. At the end of one of the room's chapters, we see this dialogue box, presumably from Hugo. Today, Papa gave me a comic, but I want to go out and play. I hate this place. I'm sure Mom will pick me up. Next chapter, the batter enters Hugo's room and finds a comic book on the ground. Once the batter interacts with it and you choose to read it, a segment begins called Panic in Ballville, and suddenly you're now playing as a character known as Boxer with 2 X's, confronting the diabolical evil of a character called Ballman, who has filled Ballville with his clones. What follows is a brief segment where the overworld is reminiscent of NES side-scrolling beat-em-ups like Double Dragon. When battles start, it's still the same combat system and menus, and it still says purification in progress, ... But very interestingly, Boxer is on the left side of the screen during battle, unlike the batter, who always attacks from the right, just like the evil clone batters we fight during this little segment. I think the primary purpose of this segment is to give us a shove towards this idea that the batter isn't clearly a good force in this world. But why don't we ask the batter what he thinks? Fair enough. I have to say I disagree though. The game we played in this segment is much more reminiscent of the older style of RPGs, and not just graphically. You play as an unambiguously good hero, linearly progressing towards a clear goal of defeating a villain who has clearly stated his evil intentions. I think in that sense, the choice of the Boxer as the hero, and if you go into his status screen in the menu, the game here literally calls him a superhero. Going up against a baseball-playing villain makes sense. Before baseball truly evolved into America's national pastime in the mid-20th century, you could argue that boxing was the country's biggest sport, and certainly the biggest one where the athletes weren't horses. Thus, for an older style of RPG, we play as an older style of sportsman. The way the sequence fades out to black before the confrontation with Ballman suggests to me that the batter decided to close the comic before we could get there. So, unfortunately, we don't really get much out of Ballman other than his few stock villain lines. But again, I don't think the personality of Ballman is all that important. He just serves as a preview to the idea that a baseball player might actually be the villain in this world, too. This segment makes it a bit more clear why the protagonist for Off was an athlete. These are the characters that influence Hugo, and that influence is likely what spawned the batter in his mind. Somebody that could totally be seen as a superhero without context, but can just as easily be a villain. The Baseball Hall of Fame's website has a section devoted to the history of the baseball uniform, called Dressed to the Nines. In the introduction to this segment, there's a pair of little written pieces about your first baseball game. The first one is meant to be about a kid attending their first pro game. There is an excitement, an anticipation as you walk to your seat. You look down onto the green expanse of the ball field, and you see them. The big leaguers. The players on your hometown team, and those of the visiting club. You may not know them all. You may only have heard of just a few. But their uniforms immediately tell you, he's on my club, and that guy's with the enemy. At the same time, while the bright, clean uniforms help bond you to your team, they also remind you that you are not wearing the uniform. You are just a fan. They are the pros. I am a firm believer in the power of sports symbolism. Baseball would not have snared me the way that it did when I was a child if it was played by dudes in t-shirts and jeans. The uniforms clearly showed that the men who wore them were special. I don't think you need to be a lifelong baseball fan, or even a sports fan, to see that power. And that, to me, is where the brilliance of the batter lies. Off is all about playing with your expectations. taking you for a ride powered almost entirely by your preconceived notions of the role-playing game genre. Nowhere did those preconceived notions get challenged for me more than through the batter. He got me. I saw his uniform and instantly thought, he's on my club. But somehow I forgot. That's not the only thing a baseball uniform can mean. Thanks for watching another episode of the Jackie Peanuts Sports Machine. I know this is a little different from the classic sports game videos I did to start out this channel, but I hope you all had some fun with this one. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.